guys, my name is Billy Roberts, a concept artist and art director. In this video, I wanted to share with you guys a key image process, directly referring to what we would see in ArtStation homepage or the equivalent of that. I wanted to share with you guys my process, the process that I have adapted and modified to my skill set, but also probably at this point a general process, because a lot of this process has come from conversations with colleagues and insight to how they would create such images, and obviously referring to the purposes of why do we create images like this. So oftentimes, as you're seeing here, we want to start simple and minimized. So at the moment I'm thinking about design. What type of design choices do I want to create? Best thing for me and most artists is to simplify this into a profile phase, a design phase only. So I'm not worried about perspective, I'm not worried about lighting, I'm just worried about shape, flow, shape hierarchy, shape balance, all of those key aspects that goes into a nice or good looking design, at least for, in this case, for key environmental art. This was architecture. So to move forward, we jump straight into Blender, and in this, just using basically all of the skills that I've learnt over my time to really expediently create a scene, lockout. From here, I'm looking at utilizing as many tricks, as many shortcuts as possible. So everything at this point is about efficiency, because you don't want to get bogged down too much in this section of the job. So I'm just blocking in the terrain, some water ideas, cleaning up some of those primary forms in that main structure. And it's a good time to talk about the diversity or the versatility of Blender here, where in this section of the video I am using curves, and I'm using that parameter inside of the tool setting to actually paint the curves onto a surface, which from an architectural standpoint and a design standpoint, this gives me really easy architectural detailing, which otherwise would take an exceptional amount of time to create. You'll see me using the same system here to actually create some of the architectural forms, using curves to do that, and then using radial array modifier to take it rotate it around the same radial arrayed structure, the concreted structure. Now we move into the secondary design elements that I was sketching in profile. Very simple shape. Here I'm just applying some really quick decaled textures just to overlay on the bottom and top, just to give me a little bit of grunge detail before I start throwing these elements around the scene. All these like wood plank elements as well. I'm using the same modifiers in Blender to set that up. So circular designs end up being very, very efficient in Blender to at least block out, which is really handy for this type of design. So all in all, this whole like key image was specifically made for YouTube. It was kind of just like a personal thing that I wanted to share with a few people who were interested. I think all in all, this whole process was probably around 6 to 7 hours. I did have some breaks in between. I think I started at nighttime and then I shut off like the next day. So it wasn't a massive time consumption, but I would advise at least spending a couple days on this type of imagery. A lot of the times this type of imagery in range in terms of quality, because a lot of the times you're using like prefab or preset assets, client or from a project IP. In that case, you probably want to end up spending around, it's different for everyone, but anywhere from a week to 3 weeks is acceptable for a very high quality key image. So you see me using a lot of the predetermined, just made some like grass stuff and threw that around with a magnet, basically a magnet project on surface move tool parameter. This just gave me the ability to basically test what type of foliage flow that I wanted from the terrain, which I ended up scrapping. Actually, later on you'll see in the 2D process I went back on quite a few of these features, and that's the reason why it's quite important to constantly be thinking, how can I make this better, basically, and not get locked in on your 3D block out too much, because a lot of the times you can get a little bit caught up in that. It's always good to assess your images, no matter how long or how far in that you are, whether or not you're liking what you've created or you're not liking what you've created. So I spent a fair bit of time modifying this water in Blender, trying to figure out if I could actually make it what I wanted it to be. And I ended up just getting frustrated with the water stuff that I had. I just didn't think it was reflecting or refracting right amount. So what I ended up doing in 2D side was basically just modifying that. I had to do it manually just for cleanup. So it's about 50% and 50% on the other side, or inside here. So 50% of the time I spent in Blender, and then the other 50% of the time on this project I actually spent in Photoshop. So here was my first rendering. I ended up not liking this composition, nor did I like the lighting. I spent some time off camera just moving some stuff around. Moved the sun around a little bit. I quickly drew a ship sort of flying through. I projected VFX that I made as well for the ship. Did that in Blender just so I could get the pathing pretty accurate. See here, this is basically the 2D process about, I would say, 40 minutes in from getting it out of 3D. And what I'm doing at this point is I end up extracting 5 to 7 layer parameters from 3D. And I'll end up basically getting a normal pass, diffuse pass, ambient occlusion pass, mist pass. Basically, these are like compositor layers. Instead of compositing inside of 3D, I end up compositing inside of Blender. And that way I get to dial in, really dial in those passes and get some really nice results. You'll see what I'm doing now. I'm still having to manually go in and lasso out and create the separation that I'm wanting in the mist. But those composite layers give me a really good head start on the 2D process. Another thing to point out with the extraction to 3D, 2D, and this is a big one, it's probably my secret advice that a lot of people should use and don't use. It's actually rendering out it's basically a randomized object pass. And the only way that you can get that from Blender is by actually rendering in the workshop render tab, going to random material flat as the parameters. It ends up giving you basically gives you the rendering. Each object will be its own color. So instead of lassoing out things, or alternatively rendering things layer by layer by layer and creating separation or masking, you can just magic wand tool the colored section underneath all of your layers. It will actually select perfectly the object that you're trying to paint onto. So that's like a little secret tip for all these concept artists out there being frustrated with the process of selection or the process of separation. It lets you use big brushes to block in a baseline of visual style and like what you're trying to achieve. So it just speeds up that process a little bit. From my perspective, it's one of the easiest render passes to do and probably one of the best passes to do if you're trying to speed up this key image creation process. So for that alone, I think I saved myself around about 4 hours just in either trying to render out layers or separation of PNGs of each object and all of that. Like it's quite a time consuming thing to be doing. Instead, I opted for this alternative selection masked process, which gives me a really nice base, and it also simplifies the layering format inside of Photoshop. I feel like in Photoshop, in the 2D process, you can get really technical with separation layers, mask layers. You end up having to then create groups, and then to modify something, you have to find the group. You've got a bunch of filters and stuff like that. So I feel like that sort of cleans up the whole Photoshop process quite a bit. So yeah, that's how we got here to this point. Was using those rendered composite layers to our advantage. It really saves a bunch of time, this type of image creation. I think here I'm just going through and picking up some of that detail stuff, just really zoomed out. So it might be hard to see exactly what I'm doing, but the point of it is actually to work on your image as it's being viewed and not zoom in too much, because a lot of the times I've seen, at least in this experienced artists, they'll zoom in and then they'll zoom out and it doesn't quite look the same or what they were trying to achieve. So the secret there is, as you're finishing up your image, you're wrapping up your image, just zoom out a bunch, work on it zoomed out, at least for that last 10%, and you will end up, you end up being able to create a little bit right decision making at that polish pass, at that result. So the next phase here on the video is I was pretty happy with the architecture and I was pretty happy with the texturing that I had done. So I ended up saving it, walking away for a bit, and I knew that I was quite unhappy with the water, foreground, midground breakup. I came back and I just polished that stuff up a little bit. This is the final result. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.